After reading one of my pieces or looking at one of my videos, I usually feel that I've been informative and used language constructively in explaining my views. But when I consult my notes, I often feel that I've left something out that's important that leads back into the Hall of Mirrors. But it did then occur to me that everybody else has a lot on their minds, particularly these days. So, while it's important to cover as much as possible, it's also important to understand the root principles that are at work. Back in the 80s, there was a surprising document that came out, surprising because Reagan was in government and he didn't particularly care about the issue, but it was called the Hunger Project, and they conveyed that the prospect for the end of global hunger was in sight if we adopted a sort of global welfareism. The idea of famine relief being part of the international safety net was possible, and there was a lot of bright and charming photography in the book, as well as the statistical facts nation by nation. It's still a remarkable book if you can get your hands on it, but I came into contact showing it around with the way that the right wing sends busybodies out to police those kinds of ideas and make it felt that good-looking girls run away from these ideals. At the University of Pittsburgh, I mean, it was a performance art thing. It was like a drama club from the Young Republicans. And for that reason, since I know that global famine relief is hopelessly out of reach at the moment, I have concern that what, for example, Greta Thunberg is doing is up against opposition that's terribly relentless. They want to cast these issues as a food fight, and it serves them to cast these issues as a food fight. Our society has not just backpedaled, but sabotaged and grossly misinformed people about the prospects of government cooperation through international labor and famine relief. But that's not the only thing they did. They created a stylistic statement about overpopulation that was meant to justify sabotaging the what makes American consumers a little bit different from some of the police states and religious regimes around the world, which is the relative freedom in romantic affairs and privacy enjoyed by American youth. And of course, abortion always seems to be the big issue, but a lot of these are managed with birth control and so forth that are just, contraceptive. But we try to keep the public schools out of it while this was going on in Pittsburgh. And grappling with the mind that's at work has caused me to put a lot of time and effort into text because it's sort of viciously cunning. But the problem with text is you say after reading it, I don't believe that person. Too many people have said it's not true. Whereas when you meet somebody and talk to them, or you hear a tape or a video like this, it's a little easier to size up maybe what the person's character is. But there are professional actors who can convince you of things that aren't true just by acting, and they seem to be very sincere. And there's no question that they're all over this case and what's going on in this case. So you have to ask yourself, who are they and what did they do to get enough information to see into and through um, the policies and processes that are working what they're doing. The Catholic worker in Pittsburgh, or at least he professed to be one, Vince Irini, was getting visits from Martin Sheen. Martin Sheen plays cutthroat mafia people and then goes into movies about Catholic worker and gives these puts on for farcical imposters who are covering for pedophile syndicates like Vince Irini. And they put together this madness under Reagan where they lured me to Mount Desert Island, and to illustrate the idea that sex is a lifelong commitment, they played a prostitution game about virginity as paradise lost and that I was an unfit father. And the whole time they knew that they had implanted a neuroplasm and knew that I didn't, so that my coordination problems, which they were laughing at, the cause of which was thoroughly known to them. They have a doctor in neurobehavioral research who's named in their script about their performing arts experiment. Wattenmaker has in his name Atten, which is like Attenborough, who Greta Thunberg is all bezoid about. But the thing is, his film about Gandhi was really well liked by the man who made Arctic, who locked me in a house from the inside with somebody named Casper, who brutally gassed me as a child and kidnapped and tortured me while working with Salk Research Labor, who built, the one place where the AIDS could come from, and it's called Ark. He really liked that in Burroughs' film. And there's this scene about this guy doesn't have any more food. And this is supposedly realism. So, this whole idea of Attenborough coming out and complaining that the Earth is at risk, climate is at risk, after years of working with felony hate criminals in Hollywood is rather strange. And you look at the pattern, you look at Cry of Battle, for example, a film that's hard to get hold of, where Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested, and War is Hell, which is virtually impossible to get your hands on. And a book like Hitler's Hollywood and the Japanese films of that time, you see that there was a shogun in Hollywood who was mixing political acts with movies about political acts that had an overlap. John Kennedy's murder was notorious in that way. Angela Dickinson had a number of films. I saw one recently in which they show, skyscraper scenes, panoramas of the roads below, and then they have her standing before this fake set romantically, and there's a comment about long-range terms, and a snickering Rockefeller type says looks more like close range. And we now know that Jackie Kennedy, who hated Martin Luther King, hated JFK enough to participate in the assassination. She was a white Russian type gal in the dollhouse. So this comes out in these films, like with Angela Dickinson and people like Burt Lancaster. So you have this situation where a sort of plastic overlap. I choose the word plastic interestingly because there's a double identity in the fraud Robert Fripp. He says in promoting Mysterium stuff, the fundamentalist gloved hand behind the operations that were so loathsome, in which he played a key role through Carnegie Mellon University with Jaime Carbonell's Neva Corporation implant tape about Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, the infamous carrot tape, which they said, proved that the queer bait was a victim of himself and so on, without any sort of investigation into what was really said and what was really going on about what was said. And Marlon Condora at the time put out this um, book called The Joke, and a lot of it was the idea that I am a joke. Scott Ryback used to say it was a joke. Mike Exler, I mean, get that name, Exler, used to say nobody takes you seriously, you're just a joke. And these people were working through Carnegie Mellon University with Paul McCartney. Ringo Starr's maniacal and violent license is a constant thread that runs through not just the fictive family situation that you find in the clubhouse movement in Seattle, who are working grisly crimes for these nuts. You can't distinguish the Seattle left wing from the, right wing Proud Boys cooks. They're doing the same stuff, dressing up as one another while doing it and all that. Not just in the fictive families, but what has been called in academics the imagined community of the nation state. Ringo Starr gets beneath the hood of the nation state and plays games with the imagined community too. And he came on to me with part of this joke, which was the girl. I mean, I liked them. I thought they were the good guys. I was wrong, but she proved it. But he came on to me and he said, "Oh, well, this is full-blooded sin for you." She takes me to her honky tonk and does the things that were associated with the freedom of romance, like as if one last time before the final call. And what is the final call? The final call is the idea that all this proves you deserve AIDS. And they have Cornel West from the Theological Seminary gesticulating with Gail Burston that this is, the rough side, rough edge of the world and the way it is. In karma relations, and if you wash, they'll be offended and so on. So what we see with Donald Trump's fiasco with catching the COVID molecule is that there's a continuing attempt to slide back and recidivism to the days when if you wash, they could be offended. The return of the Firespitters, where they want to rub their contamination on you to prove that you love them. And the thing is that sort of crime was at the root of the psychological operation that Pena Sinfield used to cover from what they did on Mount Desert Island, which was pre-planned. I've said before and shown the testimony about that. So you have the Democratic Party putting people in place like Wolf, the boy who cried wolf, before COVID, and circulating images that look like COVID. They give me something with tulip, which looks like Trump, but this thing appears on my lip. And these were brainstormers from TU, Temple University. Big boil, it gets into my gums. I'm still fighting it off. And the Chris Dusterhoff sent me the first issue of one of his circulars on the street of poetry, and it says, "Those who do not understand will be poisoned." What's going on? So if you go out to one of the restaurants, you're going to get semen in a cup and stuff, and this is the sort of thing that they're pulling. Now, when we deal with the NAACP, who see all this, touchy, Cornel West stuff as sort of a holy concept of ransom for control of our industries and so forth, like you'll be contaminated if you don't let them control you, comes from an NAACP that was a little bit like one of my big sisters when I was a little boy. She'd say mean things to me on the bus and then apologize afterwards and say, I have to be mean to you when other people are around because it's good for my image, but secretly you're not so bad. And that's what the NAACP does, like with Africa. They run down the white, but then, when people are around, you're not so bad. You know, if you read Dr. Proctor of CCAC's book and look at what Wilma Cohn was doing in that operation with that girl, Rosa, you know, they were playing friendly while sabotaging the relationship. And he talks about, you know, guys who he greatly admires who just wanted to knock a white boy out. You know, and you're supposed to, you know, accept. He said in class one day, after these people here in Seattle all but chemically castrate me, he says to the class who know all this stuff, they're supposedly honor students, in Africa, men without children might as well be dead. I mean, what a sensitive thing to say to somebody who your network and gang have done something like that to. And they don't really have anything to justify, but they say the hate that hate produced. So I'm sure that the hate that hate produced is very grave when it comes to, you know, Cambodia, who Andrew Cho here in Tacoma seems to be. Who's my suspect in the murder of Donnie Chin, by the way, who seems to be, um, you know, campaigning for it. And they have these people from, you know, Tulsi Gabbard's militia who go out. This guy came on to me online. His name was Shibu. And it's like Sheen to take the first three, the she sound, vengeance of she, you know, she sound, and use it. He is an Indian full of acting. He takes my concepts of compassion and accepting others as being like yourself and feeds them back with a laugh about I have your girlfriend now and stuff. And it's typical of these, stylistically, of these go-getters. And all of them are implicated in the murder of Circe Kennedy. I wouldn't be surprised if you find AS for Andrea Swimmer or DT for Donald Trump. You know, you find not just Tom Wolfe, the boy who cried wolf before COVID, in between AIDS and COVID, but you find the Mariners hiring somebody named Graveman. And they had this girl named Evangelia Karmas. So AIDS is supposed to be karma. So we're getting back to, you know, the idea of letting liberals be devoured by their own to show, because, you know, they supposedly, you know, the alternative, but look what becomes of such alternatives, you know. And they have this joke. And Gail Burston used to sign her letters "Love in Jest," which has, you know, the sound ingestion, you know, poison. They're poisoning people. So you have, and nobody cares. You know, they flowchart the thing and say, well, it's an if-then structure. It's not an if-then structure. Don't be fooled. They didn't give little Jimmy Carreri any choice in the matter. You don't say that somebody who's opposed to the war, who's 11 years old and deaf, is a draft dodger and draft them. You know, the duplicity of the NAACP comes out in their support for Will Zell, who was clearly involved in the premeditations of the AIDS attack, who's a white Nazi. He praises Goebbels and all of this stuff, you know, but he's an earth first. So it's very bizarre, you know, the sort of occult tribal claims that they're making and the way it all sort of wires back to their big day at the soapbox about Andrea Swimmer, who I've always tried to help say nice things about, but she's a really vicious person, it turns out. There's nothing I can really do about that. And these un-American Christians are explaining themselves by way of a game, word game, saying that AIDS was more sexually moral to start as a plague for medieval purposes than abortion is or something, you know, and you have to wonder about that. And they start putting rotten embryos in your food and stuff. And the intellectuals behind this way that the NAACP stalked me were white people. William Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist, was white. You know, Frank Herbert, who made Catsup, the soul catcher, the idea of the little boy putting his trust in the black man who's kidnapping him, befriending him, and being killed by the rockabye lullaby singer in the end as a sacrifice to the great totality of African participation in the resolution scene of the hate that hate produced is in fact a white man. And so, even when you look at the many minds of Pennsylvania who are cooperating on all of this really job weird stuff, poisoning somebody to say clean up your mouth. You're talking about a lot of them predominantly white people. So how do you take all of these issues and put them together? Well, for me, the best thing I think is to look at text and try to point out where some of these issues have been covered by people other than me, which is known as precedent. Like Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut has people, who, like a black man who construes Japanese and or Chinese as colored, and the other ones he looks with pity on somebody who says they're colored. I mean, it's just weird stuff like that that seems to permeate eugenics, and somehow this test case in BS they get somehow a coded idea of sacred truth behind this imposter system of thinking. And the reason I call it a imposter system of thinking is that many people have looked at romance between people who've had past lovers get married and leave happy lives. I don't think you can speak for everybody that way, the way the religious community, the whole Jesus community does, while playing all humane and sincere, And the primary issue for the people who were selling, the concept that Crary, who had the potential to be a most valuable player in Pittsburgh, had to be shut down and used as a utility from, genocide, was this revolting idea that John Lennon's, voice had this clitoral oomph that was pure Ayn Rand, and that somehow I had, betrayed redneck society and the hillbillies by not understanding that the people who they are now defending are behind it. As a child with coma trauma, being watched by the many minds of Pennsylvania. So I don't think a person should nauseatingly be forced to argue for their night and day for their life against like an HIV injection by these sadistic assassins at the University of Washington the way I am. So I've been trying to de-X the mongering behind this nightmare and to show you what's at risk when you stop taking precautions or abandoning without scruples to these entities of so-called progressive ideas who are just backstabbing us for the hate that hate produced that could have come from anywhere. And in fact, from all of the stuff that we see in the film Legacy, it came from Nazi Germany. These are the axes. So, I mean, good luck, but I don't think we are going to easily escape the ramifications of our silence about all of this.